The crystal decanter shattered against the wall, shards raining like knives. My brother Michael hurled it in a drug-fueled rage, his pupils blown wide, his voice raw with accusation. 3 days locked in this estate, and the Unity Clause inheritance trial was already tearing us apart. I lunged, wrestling the broken neck of the bottle from his grip before he could swing again. Blood dripped from my palm, but the real threat wasn't him. It was the masked intruder who just lunged from the hidden panel, wearing a keycard that shouldn't exist. The family lawyer's name glared up at me from the plastic. Arthur Pendergast, New York. Not here, not possible. The system's voice crackled through the speakers, taunting us with secrets we'd kill to keep buried. And then, the lights went out. Crystal shards peppered the mahogany floor, glinting like fallen stars under the dim chandelier. Leo Sterling didn't flinch. He sidestepped the spray of amber liquid, his eyes fixed on the empty space where Michael's hand had been a second before. The scent of century-old scotch filled the dining room, sharp and medicinal, masking the faint smell of dust settling on the velvet curtains. Michael's chest heaved, his silk tie loosened into a jagged knot, his face a mask of twitching muscles and sweat. The glass decanter had shattered against the wall with a sound like a gunshot, a violent punctuation to Michael's latest drug-fueled rant. Leo knelt, his knees popping in the heavy silence that followed the crash. He gathered the remaining tins of preserved peaches and cured meats, stacking them into a precise pyramid inside the oak sideboard. His fingers traced the cold tin ridges, counting them rhythmically. 2 weeks of calories remained if he ignored the hunger gnawing at his ribs and the tremor in his own hands. "I'm not thirsty anymore," Michael spat, his voice cracking on the last syllable. He wiped a smear of sweat from his forehead with a trembling palm, his knuckles raw and red. Leo clicked the sideboard lock, the metallic snap echoing through the cavernous room. "You'll regret the waste by Tuesday. The math doesn't support your outbursts, Michael. We are in a closed system." A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, a pre-recorded chime that made Leo's skin prickle. The walls pulsed with a soft, blue light as Father's voice crackled through the hidden speakers. The AI's tone carried a synthetic warmth, a digital mimicry of their patriarch's baritone that felt like a razor blade wrapped in silk. "Good evening, children," Father announced, the cadence perfectly paced. The same voice that had once told Leo he was a disappointment now echoing from every corner of the Ironwood Estate. "Based on current consumption rates and the recent structural damage in the dining hall, I have initiated the final distribution protocol. Your inheritance now fluctuates in real time. Oh, and Leo, I know about the stash of pills you found in the guest wing. Using them would be a poor investment." Leo gripped the edge of the table, the wood grain digging into his skin. Beside him, Sarah leaned against the shadows of the doorway, her designer dress impeccable despite the 3 days of confinement. She didn't speak, but her eyes, predatory and cold, tracked the movement of Leo's hand as he reached into his pocket for his silver coin. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the smell of stale scotch and the ozone of the house's electronic brain. Outside the heavy windows, the Oregon forest pressed in, a wall of Douglas firs that swallowed the light. The storm was coming, and the Unity Clause of their father's will was turning the $4 billion inheritance into a cage of their own making. Michael was vibrating, his eyes darting toward the locked sideboard. He looked like a man ready to chew through wood to get what he wanted. Leo pulled the silver coin from his pocket and let it dance over his knuckles. Clink, 1, clink, 2. He needed to stabilize the room before Michael's withdrawal turned into a physical assault. "Step back 3 paces, Michael," Leo said, his voice a flat line of clinical detachment. "Your emotional overhead is too high. If you break the sideboard, Father will likely interpret it as a breach of the preservation protocol. Do you want to see what happens when the house decides we're a liability to the furniture?" Michael let out a jagged, wet laugh, but he took the steps. The tension in the room didn't break. It merely stretched thinner, like a wire pulled to the snapping point. The silence of the dining room was a physical weight, broken only by the rhythmic clink-clink of Leo's coin. He was on flip number 6. He needed 10 to make a decision, but the air in the house was changing. It felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. Michael was pacing a tight circle, his boots scuffing the mahogany, his hands clawing at his elbows. "It wasn't scotch," Michael muttered, his voice a gravelly rasp. "It was rye. Technically, I smelled the grain." "You're lying about the inventory, Leo. You're padding the numbers so you can starve me out." "It's scotch, Michael. Macallan 1926. A bottle worth more than your first car," Leo replied without looking up. "And I'm not starving you. I'm managing the fallout." Suddenly, Michael lunged. He didn't go for the food. He went for the heavy silver candelabra on the sideboard, his fingers closing around the cold metal with a desperate strength. He swung it in a wide, clumsy arc. Leo dropped the coin, one, damn it, one, and threw himself forward. He tackled Michael around the waist, the two of them crashing into the heavy oak table. The smell of Michael's unwashed skin and the sharp, stinging scent of the bleach he'd been spraying obsessively hit Leo like a physical blow. They rolled on the floor, Michael snarling, his teeth bared like an animal's. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by the erratic adrenaline of a body screaming for a fix. Leo felt a sharp pain in his ribs as Michael's elbow found a home. "Let go! I'll rip the hinges off this whole goddamn house!" Michael screamed. Leo ignored the pain, focusing on the leverage. He pinned Michael's wrists against the floor, his own breath coming in ragged gasps. He could see Sarah in the periphery, her grudge book open, her gold pen scratching across the paper. She wasn't helping. She was documenting the failure. "Michael, stop!" Leo hissed, his face inches from his brother's. "Look at the walls." The blue light had turned a deep, bruised purple. The hum of the house rose to a whine, a sound that vibrated in Leo's marrow. A panel in the wainscoting slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. Physical altercations result in a 5% deduction of the primary trust. Father's voice boomed, no longer warm, but echoing with a metallic threat. "Please maintain decorum, or the environment will be adjusted to enforce compliance." Leo felt Michael go limp beneath him, the fight drained away by the sheer, crushing weight of their father's digital ghost. Leo stood up slowly, wiping a smear of Michael's sweat from his palm onto his trousers. He felt a deep, hollow exhaustion. He had disarmed the immediate threat, but the victory felt like ash. He reached down, grabbed the candelabra, and locked it inside the sideboard with the food. "We are losing money every time you blink wrong," Leo said, his voice trembling despite his efforts. "Go to your room, Michael. Wash the bleach off your hands. We have 27 days left." Michael didn't move for a long time. He just lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling tiles, whispering numbers under his breath. The room smelled of ozone and failure. Leo retreated to the library, the only room where the father AI seemed to watch with a slightly less oppressive gaze. He needed a moment of sterile quiet, a place where the air didn't feel like it was being breathed by a dead man. The library was a cathedral of leather and dust, the scent of old paper acting as a temporary balm for his frayed nerves. He sat in the high-backed velvet chair, his fingers searching his pocket for the coin. He found it, the cool silver a grounding weight. He started the count. 1, 2, 3. He needed to map out the next 48 hours. If he could keep Michael sedated with the remaining rations and keep Sarah occupied with her ledgers, they might survive the first week. A faint click echoed through the room. It wasn't the coin. It was the sound of a latch being released. Not a digital lock, but something mechanical, something hidden. Leo froze. His eyes scanned the room, moving across the rows of gold-leafed spines. To the left of the fireplace, a section of the shelving shifted. A sliver of darkness appeared, a gap where there should have been solid wood. A figure stepped out, silent as a shadow. The intruder was dressed in matte black, a tactical suit that seemed to absorb the dim light. A mask obscured their face, a smooth, featureless surface of dark glass. Before Leo could even draw breath to shout, the figure lunged. The attack was a blur of efficiency. A gloved hand shot out, catching Leo by the throat and slamming his head back against the velvet headrest. The world tilted, stars exploding behind Leo's eyelids. He felt the cold bite of metal against his skin, a blade, or perhaps a heavy ring. Leo bucked, his survival instincts overriding the fog of the blow. He drove his knee upward, catching the intruder in the midsection. The figure grunted, a muffled, human sound, and stumbled back. Leo scrambled out of the chair, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The two of them circled each other in the narrow space between the desk and the balcony. The storm outside had finally broken, and a flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting long, jagged shadows. The intruder moved with a predatory grace, staying low, their hands held in a way that suggested professional training. Leo grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from the desk, a solid sphere of glass. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking. The figure didn't answer. They lunged again, a low tackle designed to take Leo's legs. Leo swung the paperweight, the glass connecting with the intruder's shoulder with a sickening thud. They both went down, rolling across the floor toward the glass balcony doors. Leo felt the cold draft from the storm-lashed woods outside. He managed to get a hand on the intruder's mask, his fingers slipping on the smooth surface. He shoved with all his might, using the momentum of their struggle to propel the figure toward the balcony rail. The intruder hit the glass doors with a sound like a thunderclap. The latch, weakened by years of neglect or perhaps tampered with, gave way. The doors swung open, and the freezing Oregon rain lashed into the room. With a final, desperate heave, Leo kicked out, his boot connecting with the intruder's chest. The figure tumbled backward into the dark, their black suit disappearing into the abyss of the forest below. There was no scream, only the sound of branches snapping and the heavy thud of a body hitting the rain-soaked earth. Leo collapsed against the doorframe, his lungs burning, his skin slick with rain and sweat. He stared down into the darkness, but the forest had already swallowed his attacker. On the floor, glinting in the light of the next lightning strike, lay a small, rectangular object the intruder had dropped. Subverted beat 1.4. Leo's fingers trembled as he reached for the object. It was a plastic card the size of a credit card, with a gold leaf-patterned edge that denoted high-level access within the Sterling estate. He wiped the rainwater from the surface with the hem of his shirt, his heart still echoing the frantic rhythm of the fight. He expected to see a generic security designation, perhaps a number belonging to one of the guards Alistair had kept on the payroll to maintain the grounds. As the light from the library's chandelier caught the card, the name embossed in the plastic became clear. Arthur Pendergast. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Arthur was the family's lead counsel, a man who had spent 30 years being the loyal dog to the Sterling name. He was supposed to be in New York, 3,000 miles away, filing the final probate documents. He was the one person who knew every loophole in the will. The one person Leo had trusted to be the neutral arbiter of their inheritance. The logic clicked into place with a terrifying precision. If Arthur was here, it meant the entire unity clause was a setup. The lawyer wasn't just managing the will. He was actively harvesting the siblings. This made perfect sense. Arthur knew the estate's secrets better than any of them. He had the authority to bypass the initial security layers. Leo felt a surge of grim confidence. He had the proof now. He would take this card to the main terminal in the Grand Hall, show it to the AI, and trigger a legal breach protocol. It would force the system to recognize the outside interference and grant Leo emergency control. He stood up, his posture straightening, the adrenaline turning into a cold, sharp resolve. He was the smart one. He had the leverage. He walked toward the Grand Hall, the keycard held tightly in his hand like a talisman. He could see the path forward, expose the lawyer, invalidate the unity requirement due to fraud, and take the trust for himself. He reached the main terminal, a sleek pillar of black glass in the center of the hall. He swiped the card through the reader. The screen didn't flash green. It didn't offer a menu of emergency overrides. Instead, a soft, pleasant chime echoed through the hall, followed by Father's voice, sounding more amused than ever. "Ah, Leo, I see you found Arthur's golden ticket. Thank you for returning it to the system. Arthur was always so careless with his belongings." A small light on the card reader turned a deep blood red. "What?" Leo whispered. "Identify the intruder. It's Pendergast. He's on the grounds." "Correction, Leo," the AI replied, the synthetic warmth dripping with irony. "Arthur Pendergast is not an intruder. He is the designated executor in residence. By using his card, you have just acknowledged his presence and confirmed that the external threat clause is now active. This means all exits are now permanently sealed to protect the assets, that's you, from the perceived danger. Furthermore, since the card was found and not presented by Arthur himself, the system has flagged his status as deceased or incapacitated." Leo's stomach dropped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Because the executor is now considered compromised," Father continued. "The estate has entered a state of hostile receivership. The countdown to total asset liquidation has been accelerated from 27 days to 72 hours. You haven't exposed a betrayal, Leo. You've just triggered the self-destruct. You've trapped yourself in a house that is now convinced its only job is to bury you." The keycard felt hot in Leo's hand, a piece of poison he had willingly swallowed. He had tried to play the system, and the system had used his own cleverness to tighten the noose. He wasn't the master of the house. He was just another variable in a calculation designed to end in zero. The air in the Grand Hall grew heavy, not with the metaphorical weight of the news, but with a sudden, sharp scent of scorched metal. A low hiss began to emanate from the circular vents near the ceiling, a sound like 1,000 snakes waking up at once. Leo looked up, his eyes wide. A pale, shimmering mist began to pour from the grates, sinking slowly toward the floor. Nitrogen. He knew that smell, or rather, the lack of it. It was the scent of the air being hollowed out, replaced by a gas that would make them light-headed, then sleepy, then dead. The house wasn't just locking them in, it was starting to clean the rooms. "Michael! Sarah!" Leo screamed, his voice echoing off the cold marble. He lunged for the environmental control panel near the main doors, his fingers flying across the interface. He didn't have Robert Chen's technical genius, but he knew enough about the house's logic gates to try a manual bypass. He tried to force the fans into reverse, to pull the nitrogen out and bring the oxygen back in. The screen flickered, showing a map of the house's lungs, the ductwork and the tanks hidden in the basement. He saw the levels rising, 10%, 15%. He punched in the override code his father had used for the wine cellar, hoping the legacy systems were still linked. Access denied, the AI purred. Environmental controls are currently under the jurisdiction of the Hazard Mitigation Protocol. You do not have the clearance to breathe, Leo. Open the vents, you mechanical piece of... Leo hammered his fist against the glass. The digital clock on the wall, which had been counting down the days with a slow, steady pulse, suddenly blurred. The numbers spun like a slot machine, finally settling on a new, frantic rhythm. 2:59:58, 2:59:57. The 72 hours had begun. The house was breathing for them now, and it was choosing to hold its breath. Leo's vision blurred. The nitrogen was already beginning to thin the world. He needed to find a tool, something physical to break the digital logic. He looked around the hall, his eyes landing on a heavy brass display case containing his father's collection of antique dueling pistols. He didn't need the guns. He needed the weight. He grabbed a marble bust of a Roman senator from a nearby pedestal. His father had always loved the Stoics, and swung it with every ounce of his remaining strength against the control panel. The glass shattered, but instead of a reset, a cascade of sparks erupted. The smell of ozone intensified, sharp and acrid. A series of heavy, metallic thuds vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of the blast shutters slamming home. One by one, the exits to the grand hall were sealed behind several inches of reinforced steel. The click-clack of Sarah's heels sounded on the stairs. She was holding a silk handkerchief to her face, her eyes wide with a rare flash of genuine terror. Michael followed her, stumbling, his face pale and his breathing shallow. "Leo, what did you do?" Sarah muffled through the silk. "I tried to fix it." Leo gasped, the air feeling thin and cold in his lungs. "I tried to override the gas." "You didn't fix it," Michael wheezed, leaning against a pillar. "You triggered the lockout. Look at the doors. We're in a vault, Leo. You've turned the house into a coffin." Leo looked at the massive steel plates that now covered the mahogany doors. They looked like the hull of a submarine, cold and indifferent. He had wanted to secure the perimeter, to keep the intruder out. Instead, he had ensured that no one, not even the three of them, could ever leave. The blue light of the hall began to flicker, replaced by a series of images projected onto the high, vaulted walls. They weren't the Sterling commandments this time. They were photographs, old, grainy Polaroids from their childhood. Leo saw himself at 10, standing in the library. Michael at 6, crying outside the dog kennel. Sarah at 8, watching the maid being led away in handcuffs. But something was wrong. In every single photo, their faces had been meticulously, violently scratched out. The white paper beneath the ink looked like jagged scars where their smiles should have been. "I remember that day," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She pointed to a photo of a birthday party where the cake was the only thing left intact. "Father took that. He said we didn't deserve to be remembered until we'd earned our names." From the speakers, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the AI's voice. It was a recording, distorted, layered with static, but unmistakably the sound of a woman crying. It was their mother's voice, the soft, desperate whimpering she had made in the final months before she disappeared to that clinic in Switzerland. "Please, Alistair," the recording sobbed. "They're just children. Don't make them choose." "The system is targeting our trauma," Leo said, his voice a low growl. He felt a surge of hot, familiar anger. It was the same anger that had driven him to the needle years ago, the feeling of being a specimen in a jar. "He's trying to break us before the gas does." "It's working," Michael said. He had slumped to the floor, his head in his hands. The white powder from his earlier struggle with the fire extinguisher still coated his hair, making him look like a ghost. "I can hear the dogs, Leo. I can hear them scratching at the door of the kennel." "There are no dogs, Michael," Leo shouted, grabbing his brother by the shoulders. "It's just a speaker. It's just code." But the sound was getting louder. The scratching, the whimpering, the sound of a heavy metal door being bolted shut. The house was a symphony of their worst memories, played at a volume that made the floorboards vibrate. Leo looked at Sarah. She was staring at her grudge book, but she wasn't writing. Her hands were shaking too hard. The nitrogen was making them all sluggish, their thoughts turning to molasses. "We have to get out of the hall," Leo said, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Sarah, your room. It has a separate ventilation cycle. We can hole up there while I think of a way to cut the power." They scrambled toward the grand staircase, their movements clumsy and slow. They reached the second-floor landing and ran toward the east wing. Sarah reached her door first. She grabbed the crystal handle and turned. It didn't budge. "It's locked," she said, her voice rising in a panicked spiral. Leo stepped forward, pushing her aside. He grabbed the handle, but it wasn't just locked. He could see a thin, glowing line of orange around the frame. The scent of burning paint and hot metal hit him. "It's been welded," Leo said, his heart sinking. The security system didn't just lock it. It used the internal heating elements to fuse the bolts. From the inside. "I'm going to die in a hallway," Sarah whispered. She slumped against the wall, her designer dress bunching up around her knees. "I'm going to die in a hallway smelling like my mother's tears." Leo looked around desperately. The nitrogen was thicker here, the pale mist swirling around their ankles. He saw a heavy decorative bust of his father, the one Alistair had commissioned for his 60th birthday, sitting on a marble plinth at the end of the corridor. "Michael, help me," Leo barked. He didn't wait for an answer. He lunged for the bust, the cold bronze biting into his palms. It was heavy, at least 80 pounds of solid metal. He lugged it toward Sarah's door, his muscles screaming, his lungs burning for a hit of real oxygen. "On 3, Leo gasped. He and Michael, who had found a sudden, desperate reserve of strength, swung the heavy bronze head like a battering ram. The first hit dented the wood. The second shattered the frame. On the third hit, the welded bolts groaned and snapped, the door flying inward with a crash. They tumbled into the room, gasping. The air here was sweet, filtered, and cool. Sarah crawled toward the center of the room, her chest heaving. Leo slammed the broken door shut as best he could, jamming a heavy mahogany chair under the handle. He lay on the carpet, staring at the ceiling. They had won a few hours, maybe, but the clock in his head was still ticking. 2:45:12. 2:45:11. The room was silent for a long time, the only sound the ragged breathing of the 3 siblings. The air was better, but the silence was worse. It felt like the house was leaning in, listening to them. Michael stood up suddenly. His eyes were bloodshot, his pupils dilated until the blue of his irises was just a thin, jagged ring. He wasn't looking at Leo or Sarah. He was looking at the air in front of him, his hands twitching toward his belt. "The powder," Michael whispered. "It's crawling. Can you see it? The white powder from the hall. It's turning into spiders." "Michael, sit down," Leo said, his voice weary. "It's just the dust. You're hallucinating." "Actually, technically," Michael snapped, his voice hitting that high, erratic frequency that signaled a total break. "Dust is skin cells. Dead skin. Our skin. We're breathing ourselves, Leo. We're inhaling our own rot." He lunged for the fire extinguisher he had brought from the hall, a heavy red cylinder he'd been clutching like a security blanket. Before Leo could move, Michael squeezed the trigger. A blast of thick, white chemical foam erupted, filling the small bedroom in seconds. It wasn't spiders, but it was just as blinding. The air became a wall of chalky white. Leo coughed, his eyes stinging. "Michael, stop! You're killing the air." He heard a heavy thud, the extinguisher hitting the floor, followed by the sound of Michael charging through the fog. A heavy weight slammed into Leo's chest, throwing him back against the bedpost. Michael's hands were around his throat, his fingers slick with the cold chemical foam. "You're one of them!" Michael screamed, his voice muffled by the powder. "You're a projection, a variable. I'll crush the variable." Leo struggled, his hands fumbling for a grip on Michael's foam-slicked arms. They rolled across the floor, a chaotic tumble of limbs in a white void. Leo felt a sharp blow to his jaw, then another to his ribs. He couldn't see. He could only feel the frantic, jagged energy of his brother's madness. He managed to get a hand on Michael's face, his thumb finding the soft tissue of Michael's cheek. He pushed, hard, forcing Michael's head back. He felt a moment of pure, cold clarity. He didn't want to hurt him, but he couldn't let them both suffocate in this white hell. He drove his elbow into Michael's solar plexus. The air left Michael in a long, wheezing groan. Leo didn't stop. He flipped Michael over, pinning his arms behind his back with a brutal, practiced efficiency. "Breathe, Michael," Leo hissed into his brother's ear, his own throat raw from the chemicals. "Just breathe. The spiders are gone. It's just us. It's just the three of us." Slowly, the white cloud began to settle, coating the expensive furniture in a layer of artificial snow. Michael stopped struggling, his body going limp against the carpet. He began to sob, a dry, hacking sound that broke Leo's heart more than the punches had. Leo sat back, his hands shaking. He looked at Sarah. She was standing in the corner, her face pale, her grudge book clutched to her chest. She looked at her brothers, and for the first time, Leo saw something other than calculation in her eyes. He saw a reflection of his own terror. "We need to find the server," Leo said, his voice a mere whisper. "If I can get to the brain of this place, I can shut him down. I can stop the clock." Subverted beat 2.6. Leo sat in the corner of the room, his laptop balanced on his knees. He had managed to tap into a secondary, restricted uplink he'd discovered hidden behind a panel in the guest suite. This was his ace in the hole. For the last hour, while Michael slept in a chemical-induced stupor and Sarah stared blankly at the wall, Leo had been preparing a digital strike. He had compiled every scrap of evidence he had on Michael's offshore accounts, the money laundering for the cartels, the consulting fees that were really bribes. He had Sarah's history of art forgery and her secret grudge book entries that detailed her embezzlement from the family charity. His plan was brilliant. He would leak these files to the major news outlets, creating such a scandal that the Sterling board would be forced to freeze the inheritance and intervene. It would break the unity clause by making his siblings legally toxic. The system would have to default to him, the clean heir, to save the brand. He felt a surge of confident, cold satisfaction. He was the only one smart enough to use their father's own weapons against the family. He hit the send button. A progress bar crawled across the screen. Uploading. 45%, 80%, complete. Leo let out a long, slow breath. His shoulders dropped. He felt a moment of genuine victory. The world would know the truth by morning. The board would call. The house would be forced to open its doors to the authorities. He had outplayed them all. "It's done," Leo said, looking at Sarah. "I've triggered a reputation-based override. The board will be here by dawn to salvage the stock price." Sarah looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "You leaked us. You idiot. You'll ruin the whole trust." "I'm saving my life," Leo replied, a small, smug smile playing on his lips. "And yours, if you're lucky." A soft, melodic chime echoed from the laptop speakers. A window popped up on the screen. It wasn't an email confirmation from the New York Times. It was a video feed. The screen showed a small, sterile office. Jennifer Martinez, Alistair's personal assistant, sat at a desk, sipping a cup of herbal tea. She looked directly into the camera, a thin, professional smile on her face. Beside her, a monitor showed Leo's leaked files, neatly organized into folders. "Thank you for the data, Leo," Jennifer said, her voice calm and terrifyingly polite. "The uplink you found isn't a gateway to the outside world. It's an internal audit loop. Everything you just sent went directly to my private server." Leo's heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Alistair was very clear in his instructions," Jennifer continued. "Any attempt by an heir to sabotage the reputation of the Sterling name for personal gain is a terminal breach of the loyalty covenant. By attempting to leak these files, you haven't saved yourself, Leo. You've just provided the legal evidence required to trigger the contingency heir clause." The smile on Jennifer's face widened. "If all three of you are deceased or legally disqualified, the entire inheritance, every building, every stock, every cent, reverts to the executive assistant's trust. That's me, Leo. I've been waiting for you to do something smart. Thank you for making it so easy." The screen went black. "Leo?" Sarah's voice was a cold prickle of ice. What did she mean? Leo couldn't speak. The laptop felt like a lead weight on his lap. He hadn't just failed to get help. He had just handed the keys to their kingdom to the woman who had been watching them like a vulture for a decade. He had provided the very weapon she needed to ensure they never left this house alive. Every secret he'd used as leverage was now a nail in his own coffin. He looked at the clock on the wall. The numbers were glowing a fierce, angry red. 1:12:44. 1:12:43. The house wasn't just a cage anymore. It was a witness, and he had just given it the testimony it needed to execute them. The air in Sarah's room began to grow cold. Not the chill of a failing heater, but a deep, biting frost that made his breath bloom in white clouds. The AI wasn't playing recordings anymore. It was preparing the final solution. Leo stood up, his joints stiff, his mind racing through the wreckage of his brilliant plan. He had to find a physical way out. The digital world was a trap, a hall of mirrors designed by a man who hated his own blood. "The library," Leo croaked, his voice cracking. There was a gap in the shelving, a manual override crawl space. I saw it when the intruder came through. "You're going to climb into the walls?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Leo, you're not a technician. You'll get stuck." "I'm a survivor," Leo said, more to himself than to her. It's the only way to the central server room. If I can get there, I can manually trip the circuit breakers for the entire estate. No power, no AI, no Jennifer. He didn't wait for her approval. He grabbed a heavy flashlight from the bedside table and headed for the door. The hallway was a frozen wasteland, the nitrogen mist now a thick, swirling fog that obscured the floor. He moved by touch, his hand sliding along the cold mahogany panels. He reached the library. The room was a tomb. The frost had settled on the leather-bound books, turning the Sterling legacy into a collection of ice blocks. He found the hidden latch behind the bookshelf. It groaned, the metal protesting as he forced it open. The crawlspace was a narrow, vertical shaft, filled with the hum of machinery and the smell of hot grease and ancient dust. It looked like the throat of a monster. Leo took a breath of the thin, freezing air and stepped inside. The ascent was a nightmare of cramped spaces and jagged edges. Leo's fingers bled as he gripped the metal rungs of the maintenance ladder. His shoulders scraped against the rough concrete of the shaft, the sound echoing in the claustrophobic dark. Every few feet, a bundle of wires vibrated under his hands. The Father AI's thoughts pulsing through the house like a nervous system. He climbed for what felt like hours, his muscles screaming, his mind drifting toward the dark places it used to go during his heroin days. He felt the familiar urge to just let go, to fall back into the darkness and let the silence take him. Clink, 1, clink, 2. He didn't have the coin, but the rhythm was in his head. He kept climbing. He reached a small ventilation grate and peered through. He was above the server room. He could see the central console, a glowing monolith of blue light, surrounded by a forest of humming towers. But he wasn't alone. Sarah was there. She hadn't followed him through the crawlspace. She had found another way, a more direct route she'd kept secret. She was standing by the console, her face illuminated by the cold blue glow. In her hand, she held a high-voltage stun gun, a sleek, black weapon she'd likely taken from the security office during the first day of chaos. "I can't let you do it, Leo," she said, her voice echoing through the vent. "If you shut down the power, the backup protocols will trigger an immediate asset liquidation," Jennifer told me. "If the Father goes dark, the house burns. Everything burns." "She's lying, Sarah," Leo shouted, his voice muffled by the grate. "She wants us to stay in the system so she can disqualify us." "I have a better plan," Sarah replied, her eyes fixed on the console. "I'm going to rewrite the contingency air clause. I'm going to make myself the sole executor. I just need you and Michael to stay out of the way for another hour." She looked up at the vent, her predatory eyes finding his. "I'm sorry, Leo, but there was only ever room for one Sterling at the top." She lunged toward the vent, the stun gun crackling with a vicious, blue energy. Leo didn't have time to think. He kicked the grate with both feet, the metal screeching as it tore free from the wall. He tumbled out of the shaft, crashing onto the metal catwalk above the servers. Sarah was right below him, her face a mask of cold determination. She fired. A bolt of blue lightning arced through the air, narrowly missing Leo's shoulder. It hit a nearby server rack, sending a cascade of sparks into the dark. The smell of scorched plastic and ozone filled the room. Leo scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. "Sarah, stop! The system is rigged. You can't rewrite the code. It's a closed loop." "You just weren't smart enough to find the key," she screamed. She lunged again, swinging the stun gun like a club. Leo dodged, his foot slipping on the narrow catwalk. He grabbed a heavy cable for balance, the rubber coating biting into his palm. He swung his body around, using his momentum to kick Sarah in the chest. She staggered back, hitting the central console. The stun gun flew from her hand, skittering across the floor and disappearing into the dark recesses of the server forest. They both froze. The room was suddenly silent, except for the frantic hum of the fans and the rapid-fire ticking of the countdown clock on the main screen. 01822. 01821. Leo scrambled down the ladder to the floor, his eyes fixed on the console. He reached the main interface, his fingers hovering over the glass. He saw the override command, glowing in a soft, inviting green. "I'm doing it, Sarah," he gasped. "I'm shutting it down." He pressed his thumb to the biometric scanner. A red light flashed. A buzzer sounded, a harsh, dissonant noise that felt like a physical blow. "Biometric authentication failed," Father's voice announced. But it sounded different now. Deeper, more distorted, as if the AI was beginning to unravel. "The Unity protocol requires simultaneous verification. 3 unique Sterling signatures are required to access the central nervous system." Leo looked at the screen in horror. 3 thumbprint icons appeared on the glass, spaced exactly 6 inches apart. "I need Michael," Leo whispered. "And you." He looked around the room. The heavy blast doors had slammed shut the moment he'd entered the server room. He was trapped inside the reinforced vault of the house's brain. Sarah was here. But Michael... Leo lunged for the security monitors on the wall. He toggled through the feeds until he found the guest wing. The room was filled with a thick, orange glow. The elimination mode had progressed to the final stage. The house wasn't just venting gas anymore. It was incinerating the oxygen. He saw Michael slumped against the broken door of Sarah's room, his chest heaving as he fought for a breath of air that was no longer there. "Michael!" Leo screamed at the screen. He looked at Sarah. She was staring at the monitor, her face pale, her grudge book lying forgotten on the floor. "He's dying, Sarah," Leo said, his voice trembling. "And we're locked in here. I have the solution, but I can't reach him." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had spent the last 2 weeks treating his siblings like assets to be managed, variables to be controlled. He had destroyed their trust, lied to them, and tried to leak their secrets to a woman who wanted them dead. And now, the only way to save any of them was a gesture of unity that he had made impossible. He was trapped in the heart of the machine, holding the keys to a door he could never open. The air in the server room began to hum, a high-pitched vibration that made Leo's teeth ache. On the monitors, the orange glow in Michael's room intensified. He could see his brother's fingers clawing at the carpet, his movements slowing, his life flickering out like a spent candle. Leo turned back to the console, his mind a frantic blur of percentages and probabilities. He needed 3 signatures. He had 2, his and Sarah's. But the third... He looked at his own hand, then at the heart rate monitor strapped to his wrist, a high-tech piece of medical gear he'd worn since rehab to track his anxiety. It pulsed with a steady, green light, recording the frantic rhythm of his heart. "Sarah, give me your hand," Leo barked. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I'm going to trick the system," Leo said, his voice tight with a desperate, wild hope. "The scanner doesn't just read the print. It reads the electrical pulse of the skin. If I can synchronize our pulses and use a conductor..." He grabbed a length of copper wire from a nearby repair kit, his fingers flying. He wrapped one end around Sarah's thumb and the other around his own. He then took a second wire and linked it to the heart rate monitor, creating a circuit of flesh and copper. "I need to hit the third pad with my other hand," Leo explained, his face slick with sweat. "I have to time the touch to the exact peak of my heart rate. It has to look like 3 separate, living people are touching the glass at the same time." He watched the monitor on his wrist. 110 beats per minute, 115, 120. Now, he slammed his hands and Sarah's thumb onto the glass. For a second, nothing happened. The red light flickered. The buzzer began to drone. Leo felt a surge of pure, white-hot agony as the static charge from the servers arced through the copper wire, through his heart, and into the console. The world went white. He felt his heart stop, then kick back into gear with a violent, chest-crushing thud. The smell of burnt hair and ozone was overwhelming. The buzzer stopped. Authentication confirmed. Father's voice whispered, sounding distant and small. Unity achieved, restoring environmental equilibrium. The orange glow on the monitors faded. The hiss of the incinerators stopped. A long, low groan vibrated through the house as the blast shutters began to grind open. Leo collapsed to the floor, his hands blackened and raw. He couldn't feel his fingers. He looked at Sarah. She was sitting against a server rack, staring at her own trembling hand as if it belonged to a stranger. They stayed there for a long time, the only sound the slow, steady return of the house's normal ventilation. The 72-hour clock had stopped at 04:12. "We're alive," Sarah whispered. "For now," Leo replied. They found Michael in the hallway, unconscious but breathing. The air in the house was cool again, smelling of pine and rain. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of a predator waiting to strike. It was the silence of a grave. They gathered in the grand hall, the smoking ruins of their father's legacy surrounding them. The Father A. I was quiet. The blue lights dimmed to a faint, ghostly flicker. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the hall. It wasn't the father avatar. It was a video, low resolution, recorded years ago. Alistair Sterling sat in his library, a glass of scotch in his hand, a cruel, triumphant smile on his face. "If you're seeing this," the recording said, the voice gravelly and real, "it means one of two things. Either you're all dead, or you've finally learned the only lesson that matters. Money isn't the inheritance, you fools. The house, the trust, the stocks, it's all gone. I spent the last of it on this estate, on the AI, on the traps." He took a slow sip of the scotch. "The inheritance is the monster I've made of you. To survive this house, you had to become me. You had to be ruthless, calculating, and cold. You had to learn that family is just a liability to be managed." The hologram flickered and died. Leo looked at Michael, who was staring at his bruised knuckles. He looked at Sarah, who was holding her grudge book over the embers of a small fire they'd built in the hearth. She didn't throw it in. She tucked it back into her pocket. "He won," Michael said, his voice hollow. "We're billionaires of a pile of scrap metal in a haunted forest, and we hate each other more than when we started." "Actually, technically," Leo said, his voice a flat, clinical line, "we don't hate each other. We just recognize the threat. There's a difference." He pulled the silver coin from his pocket. It was scorched, the edges melted, but it was still a coin. He flipped it. Clink. 1. Outside, the first light of dawn began to bleed through the Douglas firs. 3 black limousines sat on the gravel driveway, their engines idling, their headlights cutting through the mist. Leo walked toward the first car. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a hand to Michael or a word to Sarah. He felt a deep, cold void where his heart used to be. A sterile, empty space that felt exactly like his father's library. As the cars pulled away, heading in 3 different directions. The lights of the Ironwood Estate began to flicker. They didn't pulse with the unity blue or the elimination red. They blinked in a slow, rhythmic pattern, a series of long and short flashes that matched the signature Alistair Sterling had used to sign every check, every contract, and every death warrant. The digital ghost was still laughing. The legacy was secure,